Wars today don't begin the way people expect. They don't start with invasions or tanks crossing borders. They start with statements, headlines, and carefully framed narratives. These narratives are designed to shape how the conflict will be understood. This happens before the first shot is fired. By the time missiles launch or troops move, the real fight is already underway. The fight over perception: who looks justified? Who looks aggressive? Who looks like they had no choice? In this video, we're breaking down why modern wars are fought for perception rather than territory, how this shift has changed military strategy, why controlling the story often matters more than controlling the ground. If you enjoy deep, no-nonsense military analysis like this, make sure to like the video. Subscribe to the channel and comment below for more content. Territory still matters, but not in the way it once did. In earlier eras, land represented power directly. Control the land and you controlled the population, the economy, and the ability to project force outward. Losing territory meant losing leverage almost immediately. That relationship has weakened. Modern states can lose ground without collapsing. They can abandon territory temporarily without conceding defeat. In some cases, they can even gain strategic advantage while losing land, as long as perception remains favorable. What matters now is not what is held, but what is believed. Wars today are fought in front of multiple audiences at the same time. Domestic populations, allies, neutral states, rival powers watching for weakness, financial markets, international institutions, social media platforms that compress complex conflicts into short emotional narratives. Each audience interprets events differently, but they all influence whether a war can continue. If domestic support collapses, political leaders lose freedom of action. If allies lose confidence, resources dry up. If neutral states shift perception, legitimacy erodes. Territory alone cannot secure any of that. This is why modern military operations are often calibrated rather than decisive. Strikes are measured, escalation is paced. Red lines are communicated publicly and privately. Not because militaries lack capability, but because perception must be managed continuously to avoid unintended consequences. Every action sends a message. Every pause does too. In this environment, overwhelming force can become a liability instead of an advantage. A decisive battlefield victory that looks excessive or reckless can damage legitimacy, fracture alliances, or provoke escalation far beyond the original objective. This creates a paradox. The stronger a military is, the more carefully it must use that strength. Modern war is therefore less about destroying the enemy and more about controlling the narrative surrounding force. The question is no longer, can we take this territory, but how will taking this territory be interpreted? That question drives strategy far more than maps do. This shift is most visible in how wars end, or more accurately, how they don't. In the past, wars ended when one side lost the ability to resist. Capitals fell, armies surrendered, treaties formalized new borders. The outcome was unmistakable. Modern wars rarely offer that clarity. Instead, conflicts linger in a state of unresolved tension. Ceasefires replace peace. Front lines freeze and unfreeze. Violence ebbs and surges without final resolution. The war never truly ends, it just becomes normalized. This is not accidental. Ending a war definitively requires one side to admit defeat. In the modern information environment, defeat is as much psychological as it is military. Leaders who concede too clearly risk domestic backlash, regime instability, or long-term loss of legitimacy. As a result, wars are often managed rather than concluded. The goal becomes sustaining a narrative of resistance, resilience, or inevitable success, even when material conditions suggest otherwise. As long as perception holds, political survival remains possible. This dynamic fundamentally changes the role of territory. Land becomes symbolic rather than decisive. A city might be defended not because of its strategic value, but because losing it would damage morale or perception. A village might be retaken repeatedly not because it matters militarily, but because it provides images, headlines, and proof of momentum. The battlefield becomes a stage. Each advance and retreat is less about control and more about signaling. Who is advancing? Who is retreating? Who appears confident? Who appears desperate? These signals matter more than the actual ground involved. This is why modern wars often appear inefficient or irrational to outside observers. Enormous resources are expended for marginal territorial gains. Casualties mount without clear breakthroughs. Operations seem disconnected from decisive outcomes. But when viewed through the lens of perception, these choices begin to make sense. Maintaining the appearance of momentum can be more important than achieving it. This also explains why military success does not automatically translate into political victory. A force can dominate tactically while losing strategically if perception turns against it. Civilian casualties, media framing, diplomatic isolation, or prolonged timelines can undermine legitimacy, even in the face of battlefield superiority. In modern war, legitimacy is a form of power. Legitimacy determines who can act freely and who must justify every move. It shapes coalition behavior. It influences economic pressure, sanctions, and international support. Once legitimacy erodes, even the strongest military finds itself constrained. This is why perception warfare is inseparable from military operations. Information campaigns, diplomatic messaging, and strategic communication are not supporting efforts anymore. They are core components of modern warfare. Narratives are prepared before conflicts begin. Messaging frameworks are established. Legal justifications are drafted in advance. By the time shots are fired, the story's already in motion. This preemptive narrative shaping determines how events will be interpreted once violence begins. If one side successfully frames itself as defensive, restrained, and reasonable, it gains flexibility. If the other is framed as aggressive or reckless, its options narrow rapidly. This framing often matters more than the facts on the ground. This does not mean truth is irrelevant. It means truth is filtered. In the modern information environment, events are rarely consumed in full context. They are condensed into clips, headlines, and talking points. Complexity is flattened. Emotional impact outweighs strategic nuance. This rewards perception management over territorial control. A single viral image can outweigh months of battlefield gains. A poorly explained operation can erase years of diplomatic effort. A moment of perceived overreach can harden opposition and rally adversaries. As a result, restraint becomes strategic, not because leaders are unwilling to use force, but because force must be applied in a way that sustains the desired perception over time. This constraint shapes how modern militaries plan. Rather than aiming for total victory, strategies focus on endurance. Can the coalition hold together? Can domestic support be maintained? Can escalation be controlled? Can the narrative be managed long enough to achieve political objectives? These questions dominate planning rooms. Territory is considered, but it is rarely decisive by itself. This also explains the rise of gray zone conflict. Actions below the threshold of open war allow states to pursue objectives without triggering decisive responses or damaging perception too severely. Cyber operations, proxy forces, economic pressure, and influence campaigns allow competition without overt escalation. In gray zone conflict, territory is often irrelevant. Influence, access, and perception become the currency of competition. This blurs the line between war and peace. Conflicts exist in a constant state of tension, punctuated by moments of violence, but rarely resolved. Each side maneuvers for advantage without crossing lines that would force a definitive outcome. This ambiguity is not a failure of strategy. It is the strategy. By avoiding clear endings, states preserve flexibility. They avoid admitting defeat or forcing victory. They maintain narratives that sustain domestic and international positioning. This creates a world where wars feel endless, unresolved, and confusing. But within that confusion, a clear logic operates. The objective is not land, it is leverage. Leverage over allies, over adversaries, over populations, over future negotiations. Perception generates leverage. A state perceived as strong gains bargaining power. A state perceived as resilient gains time. A state perceived as legitimate gains support. Conversely, a state perceived as reckless or desperate loses options rapidly. This is why modern war often feels disconnected from traditional military logic. Firepower still matters, logistics still matter, troops still matter, but they matter insofar as they support perception. Territory is a tool, not the prize. This reality is uncomfortable, especially for societies accustomed to viewing military success through clear victories. It challenges deeply held assumptions about what winning looks like. Winning today often means not losing perception. It means sustaining alliances, preserving legitimacy, avoiding catastrophic escalation, managing narratives long enough to achieve political objectives incrementally. This is slower, messier, and far less satisfying than traditional victory. But it reflects the reality of modern power. Wars are no longer contests of conquest. They are contests of endurance, credibility, and belief. The side that controls perception controls the pace, the pressure, and ultimately the possibilities for resolution. And in a world where total war is too dangerous to fight openly, perception has replaced territory as the true center of gravity. This is why modern wars look the way they do, and why understanding perception is no longer optional. It is essential.